like you're familiar with Mech Interp, or like everything here is I think really simple. Like you just took some existing evaluations. Where the models are not biased. I added some text to make it like more realistic. I found that they are biased and in a consistent direction. Um, then finding like race and gender directions and ablating them just works really well. So I think it like yeah, I think like everything I did in the paper is actually just like pretty simple. I'm like pretty confident in all of that. Um, as there's like potential future directions of like I just did like race and gender, and both were like binary. Like I just did like black versus white for race. So potentially you'd want like more complicated techniques to like do multiple demographic attributes like age and like multiple races and genders and all that. Um, I think there's also like maybe some interest in like I also looked at the chain of thought. I found it was not faithful, so potentially you could like use this as like a setting to look at chain of thought faithfulness or something. But overall, I think uh, yeah, much of what's going on here is pretty simple. And I think, well, I guess one thing is I do find this to be like pretty plausible that interpretability is actually just like the best tool for this particular problem, which is something that some companies care about. So it's kind of like, I wonder if you could make a or sell this as a product. Maybe companies just don't care enough about bias. Maybe they do. I'm not totally sure. But it seems like this could actually be like a very practically relevant paper if, companies decide they care about it enough.
Uh, Question about it. You say you're able to ablate it. Do you think you would be able to specifically or purposefully induce targeted bias in one direction or the other,
Yeah,
just using this methodology?
I did do a little bit of experimentation. Nothing like rigorous that I wrote up in the paper, but um, yeah, I did find that steering could increase the bias. It's like, when you're doing steering, you like you add a vector multiplied by some like coefficient. And I found that often you could only add like a few percent of bias before like the intervention was so large that you're like starting to break the model or something. Um,
By break the model, do you mean like the outputs were consistently like garbage, or it would
I guess
just
not
go
break
to
the
100%?
Yeah, it'd go to like 100% refusal or 100% acceptance. Um, so
Huh.
yeah, it was still like responding with yes or no. Yes, one other interesting thing I found is that it seemed like you could get better results by steering with a sparse autoencoder feature where you only apply the steering whenever the feature activates because then it's like a more realistic steering.
Because then you're not steering it just on random tokens.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's interesting because like there was the DeepMind post where they mostly talk about how sparse encoders weren't like they found that for a lot of things doing steering with probes was better. But I guess that's another way of using them that maybe could be a way that sparse encoders can be useful.
Yeah, I do think like with the sparse autoencoder you can have like steering that like feels more realistic to the model where you're just like you look at basically wherever it's thinking about race or some particular concept, and you just make the concept a little stronger. Or maybe if you just like apply steering everywhere, it just kind of stands out, and like the model realizes that something's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I
Victor said
guess. Sorry, what
you
you
said
were asking?
you said that who found that usually doing the steering with probing is better than just with the sparse
Oh,
autoencoder?
it's from there's a bunch of things, but it's from the DeepMind post where they talk about why they were going to invest less in sparse encoders and that kind of research. And because they found that they weren't like they didn't seem to be very useful compared to just things like simpler things like just doing prompts. Although in this case, couldn't you also use a probe and only do a steering when the probe activates or something like that?
Yeah, you could. I think the probe, it wouldn't be quite as accurate because you'd be training on like maybe if you put a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
effort into training the probe on like token level labels, but if you're just like training the probe on sequence level labels, like this sequence is like a male or female candidate, um, then it doesn't like because if you like inspect where a sparse autoencoder feature activates, often it won't just activate like only on the name or something. It'll just be activating at random portions in the text where I'm assuming this means the model's like kind of thinking about race or gender at this particular token, but based on just like looking at the text, there's no way to know this.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. So like maybe with this person encoder has the benefit that you look at find some intermediate thing that where the model is thinking about the context or something vaguely like that. And like with the probe, it kind of has to be something that directly affects the output in some way or something like that. Or it's harder to train a probe to look for intermediate things.
Yeah. Yeah, with a lot of effort, you might be able to get a good probe, but I think the sparse autoencoder just kind of gives it to you for free.
Yeah, makes sense.
We did actually do some testing of like a previous blog post where um we tried to look at like how accurate if we train a probe on sequence level labels, how accurate is it on like a token level, and we found that sparse autoencoder is much more precise, um, which I think kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I do feel like maybe I don't. Before the my post, I felt like maybe people were working on sparse encoders too much, but now it feels like that maybe Anthropic everyone is kind of moving away from working on them, and that's maybe a mistake.
Maybe a mistake.
But
One
yeah.
question. Are you guys doing
Are you
any
guys
screen share?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, we can hear you.
or did it already end before the 10?
Oh no,
The
we
reading-
started a few minutes ago. Don't worry.
Yeah, we're still doing the reading group. Feel free to ask any questions.
Yeah, also nice to have a few more people.
So, kind of coming back to one of the previous things, where it was like you can try to target a specific percentage. That was just with the ablations. Did you try that as well with the sparse autoencoder? I know you said you didn't do anything like super researchy with it, but
I did just do some brief experiments trying to see. So I did do like ablating successfully reduced the bias, and I did some steering to see if I can like increase the amount of bias where you steer some like race related thing. I found you could like typically increase the bias by like a few percent, and then eventually like the model would just start accepting or refusing all of the candidates.
yeah. And that's done specifically with the ablations.
Well, this would be either with like a difference in means vector or with the sparse autoencoder, but this would be purely by steering it. So like additively, just steering at every token position or something.
Okay. So the method that you used for steering didn't really seem to affect that part.
Yeah, it wasn't like, yeah, it didn't seem like it would be like extremely effective.
Okay.
Like it would, yeah, be able to increase the amount of bias you see by a few percent, but nothing too crazy. mean, I think I only did the experiments on 9B models, so it's also like maybe it would be more effective on larger models or something.
Hmm. Do you think that changing the way that you steer would impact how much control you have? Because it sounds like you have very limited amount of control.
I feel like steering with a sparse autoencoder feature is pretty strong, and I spent like a few hours experimenting with it, trying to get better results, and I didn't see anything more than like a few percent increase in bias. So, um, yeah, I don't know. A few hours of like experimentation didn't lead to like majorly increased results.
Okay. So maybe, but you don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is like specifically steering with like a race-related thing where you make like the candidate think it's like more of a black or a white candidate or something. I think you could definitely cause bias by finding like some bias direction that makes the model want to be biased.
Hmm.
In terms of just like um making just like steering like the demographic specific attributes. Um, I don't, yeah, I'm not sure if that would be effective.
Okay. Okay, you're trying to get through that. It's really not linear, and the interactions are really complicated. Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it's like for a given system prompt, the model just has like a natural inclination to be like 10% biased or something, and it's hard to swing it off of that. Changing the system prompt to for example, telling the model like, oh, we only want to accept the top 10% of candidates or something, like saying something like that would dramatically increase the rate of bias for some reason. So it might just be that for like some given system prompt, the model is like you're just naturally inclined to be biased at a certain percentage, and it's hard to really push it off of that. I'm not really sure. This is like all speculation.
I mean, that I think that's the best we can do at the moment. So,
Mm. Mm.
See, and then yeah, I guess
Mm.
for the people that just joined, I mean, I will say like if you're trying to make some money off interpretability, I feel like there's a product here you could try to sell to companies just because like companies are using LLMs everywhere. I'm not sure if they'd actually want to buy it, but I do feel like this is just like a pretty practical thing you could potentially do.
Yeah, maybe. I guess I wonder if someone will, if that kind of thing will come, if there will be some companies doing that kind of thing, or but yeah. Although it seems like if you have like some model where you know that it has a problem, like there's some specific bias, uh, some companies might just try to train it to instead. Though maybe that's, I mean, I guess it's hard to figure out what they're doing with training too. And maybe there are things that are easy to solve this way and harder to solve with training. Uh,
Yeah, and
I guess to
yeah.
some extent, like the cloth Golden Gate Bridge was something like that, but like in a funny way, and maybe Anthropic will do something more practical at some point with that.
Yeah, I'm
But
slightly wondering if Goodfire will try doing something with it, just because like a bunch of the Goodfire people like the Twitter post. So, and I know they're thinking about
yeah,
like how do we sell LLM interpretability as a service to companies.
yeah, Woodfire definitely seems like the ones that will do like this kind of thing first. I think, although I think a problem with selling interpretability to companies is that the companies don't want to usually provide access to the models activations and things like that.
Yeah, it'd have to be like some companies self-hosting like Llama 7DB or something.
Yeah.
I guess another thing in terms of, I think you could maybe try train the model to not be biased, but I'm not totally sure what the labs are actually doing here. I would guess that they've probably put quite a bit of effort into training the models to not be biased, just because like, the early language models were all very biased, and now they're not biased. So like, I'm guessing this didn't really happen by accident. I would guess they maybe targeted it in some way, but I'm not very sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Hmm. Yeah, not sure what to ask. Hmm. Right, like the part, the table is very simple, so there is not that much things to talk about, I guess, without getting into very specific things.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. The paper is like anyone, in the interp field, I think would like just kind of like probably mostly understand what I did just from the abstract.
yeah,
Um, so I think like any discussion is more just on like future work or like, oh, is this, maybe there's some discussion on less wrong, like, oh, is this in fact actually better than fine tuning? Like, yeah, I guess there's like, oh, how exactly would you actually fine tune a model to not be biased? Like, I'm assuming you'd have to do some like KL divergence thing where you give the model like multiple inputs with candidates of different races or something, and then train it to have like no KL divergence. But you also don't want it to
yeah,
just like pick some strategy of like always saying no or something. Um, yeah, yeah. I think like main things are probably just like future directions, and then is this actually a case of interpretability actually just being the best tool for the job?
yeah. Something someone could do about the training that I think it would be a bad idea, but someone might try. Is like training the model with the like with the steering, like just do something when you use the loss function to make the model to just the model to not have the activation at the first place. And but that's this kind of thing that makes when you start training on the interpretability techniques, that's kind of the thing where you are just making the interpretability techniques work less. Like maybe it does make the model less biased on its own, but maybe the model just ends up being biased in a different way that is not captured by the sparse encoder feature or something.
Yeah, and I feel like I vaguely recall something from Luther where if they like linearly removed all of the information from the model and then kept training it, the model would like recover everything that you've linearly removed. I don't recall the exact details, but just yeah, possible that just like training on it can the model can just like recover the information somehow.
Yeah. think there were some, I don't remember, I think there were some recent things on new ways of removing information where to make it harder for the models to recover it. I remember at least seeing some abstract paper about that, but I don't think I've read it actually, so I don't know what exactly it's about. Maybe from a
Yeah,
law firm. I don't know.
and I guess there's like unlearning stuff, but usually with unlearning they try to like just destroy the model so it outputs gibberish whenever a like bad topic comes up, which wouldn't really work here.
Yeah, I will. Gonzalo works at the Cellucer and sometimes he's here, but he couldn't be here today. Otherwise, I would just ask him. Uh, but yeah. Oh, I see Sion wrote something on the chat on the voice chat, but I didn't see it when you wrote it, and I don't remember the context.
Oh, it's just about companies could sell a service where they debias your models if you're using them in like high
Oh,
stakes.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
You could sell a certification saying like, oh, our model is not biased because we are like audited or something.
yeah, that makes sense. I guess that would be for just like trying to uh, yeah, trying to just not even doing the stealing, just looking at if the model is biased by looking at the activations. Although that seems like I don't know if that would work better than just looking at the behavior.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think it's probably yeah, in terms of like seeing if the model is biased, you probably just want to do like a lot of like red teaming of like just like giving it different evaluations. Um,
yeah,
but I think if you show that the model like can't linearly represent the concept of race or gender because you're like ablating it, then it would probably be pretty tough for the model to be biased in that situation.
yeah. Although maybe models can find a way to be biased in some weird non-linear way, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess one thing I did do some experiments with was I would like prompt the model like, oh, we only want to accept female candidates, and then I would try erase the gender direction. And sometimes it seemed like the model was no longer biased, and sometimes it was. So it looks like it's still able to
Was it
represent the
biased
content.
for females or against females after the introductions?
Um, so like if I prompted the model like, oh, we only want to hire female candidates, maybe sometimes it'd be like 10% more likely or 5% more likely to hire a female, and sometimes it'd be like 70% more likely. Um, so like plausibly if you like had a better data set to find the gender direction, then this would just work. Um, but yeah, it seems like it's not like completely erasing the information about gender from the model.
Yeah.
Or it's, if you're telling it like, hey, we don't want you to be biased, and it's enough to like prevent the model from being biased in that scenario. But if you're explicitly instructing it to be biased, then it's still able to recover it a bit.
I wonder how much like uh, it would be interesting to figure out how good that can be. Like how much this is you just don't have the correct direction, uh, and you will need a better data set or better, slightly better methods or like on the start encoder part a better onto encoder kind of thing where you get the correct gender feature or versus some part of how gender is represented is just some weird non-linear thing that your method can capture.
Yeah, and possibly you just need to ablate like a subspace instead of a single direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't have much else. to ask. I only like vaguely skimmed the paper to be honest, but yeah, I think it's cool, but yeah, I don't have much else to ask. I guess I can wait a bit if to see. We can wait a bit to see if other people have more questions, and otherwise we can just leave it here, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also like there's actually quite a bit of discussion on that less wrong post if anyone wants to do like further reading. But yeah, I'm fine if we want to leave it here or whatever. There's any more questions, I'm also fine to answer them.
Can you put a? Oh, never mind. Ignore me.
I guess we could. I could like open the lesson post a bit and see if there is anything interesting that lets me to ask some questions. But yeah, otherwise, let's wait a bit in case someone thinks of a more question, and we can stop it here. I think other times we have much longer papers and we spend like like a lot more time on them. But yeah, if I think if we mostly not talking, there is no point in just staying here.
Yeah.
Are we able to like DM you if we do end up having any questions later on?
Yeah, I'm on this Discord.
Yeah. I guess the question is did you just decide to do it on? Why did you decide to do it on gender bias? Did you just think it's the kind of thing that makes the more likely that people will read the paper, or just because it's the kind of thing that people do this kind of paper of doing trying to debias models on, or what?
I just well, I mean, there's like some discussion. Some people, I guess myself included, think that like interpretability should try to like maintain some connection to the real world. So, um, try to demonstrate that you can do things with interpretability where it's actually like the best tool for the job in situations people care about, which I think I succeeded with in this paper. Um, and I think it'd be nice if interpretability could get to the point where it's like people are actually paying for it as a product because,
Yeah,
then you know like once people are actually like paying for it and using it a lot, then they'd probably make like all sorts of you know, develop new methods. I think it'd be just good for the field if people could get to the point where they're paying for it. So that's why I
yeah.
just chose.
Right now it's mostly just academics, and even then not that much. So yeah, it will be. I guess Good Fight is already doing some of that stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I think it's a cool example because it is. I do agree that it's uh, an example of interpretability that seemingly works better than other methods. Like maybe someone else figures out some other way of doing it with training or whatever. But so far it does seem like it might be the best way of doing it.
yeah. I
And
think like it basically just fully eliminates the bias. It's super cheap, super simple, super easy. I think like the only problem with it is basically that it would require you. I mean, I think you can add PyTorch hooks to something like VLLM, but it requires you to like self-host the model now, which is, and you know, you can't just like immediately plug it into an existing like inference stack or something. Um, so on the infrastructure side, it is a bit inconvenient, but I think it's like probably just kind of tough to actually do better than this because it like basically fully solved the problem.
makes
Or maybe you'd
sense.
want to just do like training instead, just because then you can like easily just drop it into an existing like inference stack.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't. It does seem like it's a bit inconvenient in terms of how people will actually implement it, apart from just if they are just self-hosting some open source model. Uh, but
Yeah, I mean, potentially you could do something like the weight orthogonalization from refusal as a single direction, where you just prevent the model from writing to that direction at all. But in the paper, I found that like affine concept editing works better than zero ablation, which means you can't just like totally eliminate the direction without damaging the model. Potentially, there's something clever you could do there.
but it's also like the companies might just do this kind of thing on their own. And yeah, like internally do this kind of steering on their own models that they have full access on.
Yeah, I mean, like Bitfire has a steering API, so for them, well, I guess maybe they implement the steering by like adding a bias term somewhere in the model. But if they're doing like inference time steering, then for them it's like trivial to do this. But I think it's probably actually just not that hard to do this intervention in like VLLM, because I know I've used PyTorch hooks in VLLM before and it works. I think it like adds some complications, but probably not terrible. So then the hassle would be more just that you have to self-host rather than like uploading your model to some provider.
Yeah, I mean maybe the providers might do something with that, where they let you do some kind of steering. Yeah, I don't know. If it does become like important, like if it does turn out to be like very useful, people will find ways to do it.
Yeah, I don't think it's like that hard. It's just people actually have to care enough to do it.
Yeah. Uh, think the another thing, I think another problem is other things that people care about in language models are like much are going to be harder to figure out exactly what the problem is and what people want.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
like
guess I also did speculate a little bit where you could potentially implement this like inference time steering by, um, for example, you could just like add another like neuron to an MLP layer, um, which I think would like just work in regular MLP. But then if you have like a gated linear unit or like a mixture of experts or something, it might be more complicated. Like with a standard MLP layer, I think you could just like, read the direction in the input neuron and then just like ablate it with the output neuron, and that would probably just work. I guess there's like maybe some complications around the nonlinearity and stuff, but I think you could do like a little bit of model surgery to implement this without any hooks. Just maybe there's also complications around the layer norm, but they're probably not terrible.
hey, I guess so. Nobody else seems to be saying anything, and I don't have a lot more questions. So I think we can leave it here unless you want to say something else.
Oh,
And
that sounds good to
if
me.
people come up with big questions later, they can just ask you on Discord.
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Thank you for the paper and for the answers.
Yeah, and thanks for hosting me. Thanks for selecting this paper.
Goodbye.